So I thought we'd have a little fun this Friday and talk about something probably everybody has had some experience with, and that is working with a jerk. Now, how did I get this topic? Well, earlier this week, I was having a conversation with somebody, and while we were talking, their phone buzzed and said, I hope you don't mind. I need to take this call. And I said, no problem. Or it wasn't a call. It was just, I need to respond to this this email. And so I watched the person's face as they were reading and responding to the email. And I could just see like this like frustration and a little bit of like, that sense of, and so when they were done and they put the phone down, they said the person's name and said, so and so is such a jerk, which made me say, well, tell me more. I want to know about this jerk. And we had a really interesting conversation about this person and the impact that they have on my friend's job and their work environment, and how frustrating it can be to work with somebody who is completely a jerk. And as I learned a little bit more about the story, really there's a long history of this person being a jerk. And pretty much everybody in the company knows this person is a jerk, but nothing's ever been done about the jerk. So it made me just think about, how do you deal with jerks? What do I do when I work with someone who's a jerk? So, and I've done that. I've been there, done that. Hopefully I have not been considered the jerk ever, but you never know. But I know that a lot of us have either in the past or currently have somebody that fills this role. So I wanted to break this down because I remember one particular jerk that I worked with earlier in my career. This person made me so crazy all the time. I couldn't figure out why they just couldn't get it together. Like, why were they so disruptive to the organization, to me, to my job? And I spent a lot of emotional energy on this person, being frustrated with this person, being angry at this person. Eventually, that person was terminated, but it took way too long for that person to be terminated. And actually, they were terminated after I left the organization. And it really should have happened long before. And in fact, myself and other colleagues had gone to HR about this person because of kind of the level of this person's jerkness or disruptiveness. And nothing was ever done. But that was also before I understood the inner workings of an HR department and how important it is to do the right things and try and coach and counsel and, try and get somebody to what I call rehabilitate from their bad jerk ways. So I wanted to break it down like this. If you have somebody that you work with that's a jerk, the first thing you have to do is clarify, is this person just simply annoying? Are they a nuisance or causes a disruption? So that's kind of the second choice, or causes problems. Or the third choice is, are they a threat? Now, they might be all three of those things, but I really think it's important to clarify, because if somebody's just annoying, that's one thing. If they are a nuisance or they cause problems, that's another level. And if they're a distinct threat, that's another level. So once you've clarified that, then let's quantify it. So how much interaction do you have with the person? Do you have a little or virtually none? Do you have some, or are you, do you have a lot of interaction with them? So depending on both those answers in terms of, the clarification of how much of a jerk they are and how much of a threat and how much time you have to spend with them, those two things also come into play. But then the third component is, what is their impact on your job? Do they have a little or no impact on your job? Do they have a lot, or do they have virtually none? And as we break through this, we talk about, well, what do you do? It all depends on where we land with those three things of those three courses. So let's talk about it. So clarify, when I first said, let's clarify. If they're annoying only, and they have very little interaction with you, and they have very little or no impact on your outcomes, well, guess what? Sometimes you just have to suck it up and deal with them and try and avoid them. But sometimes that just needs to be something that you have to let go. And I've worked with people like that were annoying, that had little or no impact, and I had virtually no interaction. But when I did interact with them, they were very annoying. They bothered me, and I still used too much of my emotional energy being annoyed at them. If I could go back now in time, I would try and just spend as little time as possible with them and try and let it roll off me. Have yoga dog mentality of, I don't have to deal with this person very often, so I'm not going to let it go too crazy in my head. So that's my advice with that person who is annoying, but very little or no contact and has very little or no impact on your job or outcomes. Ignore and breathe. All right. So then let's break down the second one. What if they're annoying with a lot of interaction with you, but they still have little or no impact on your outcomes? And so when I'm talking about outcomes, it's about whether or not you are able to perform your job. So if they're annoying, but you have to deal with them a lot, but they really have no interaction or no impact on your outcomes. Again, unfortunately, the strategy is breathe and be yoga dog. Now, here's the challenge. If they are annoying, you have a lot of interaction and they have a big impact on your outcome. Now you have to ask yourselves a couple questions. What is annoying about them and what can you live with? But what do you have to do something about? Because sometimes there are people that are really annoying and they do have an impact. You can't escape them. And you have to decide what's really important that I can breathe through and what's not, that maybe I need to figure out who to talk to in order to help change the situation. Maybe that doesn't mean get the person fired, but sometimes that mitigation of following the chain of command allows you to be able to have someone else help that person and actually help them change their attitude, change their behaviors, change how they interact with people. And so in those cases, I would suggest first, maybe going to your supervisor and saying, hey, I'd really like to talk. Now, I always use the names Bob and Sally because they just are easier for me to remember all the time. Go to your boss, Sally. Sally, I'd really like to talk about Bob. Now, Bob is, kind of annoying. You and I both know. But here's the problem. I have to interact with Bob a lot. And here are some of the problems that he's causing. And I wonder if you can help us because I need to make sure that he is following the chain of command or he is operating in the right mindset for the company. And so you can go to your supervisor and say, the reality is I know Bob annoys me, but here's where we're really actually having some breakdown. Can you help mitigate that? And so in those cases, you can actually help that person become better and less of a jerk and less annoying by following the chain of command. So let's take the second scenario. So now the person is not just annoying, but they're a nuisance. And maybe they even cause some problems. So maybe not earth-shattering problems, but cause enough problems to give you headaches. So they're a nuisance, but you have little or no interaction with them and they have little impact on your outcome. Guess what? Ignore and breathe like yoga dog, except for in certain circumstances where if they really are impacting your outcomes in a negative way repeatedly, then again, follow the chain of command and try to find some mitigations for that person. So I'd go back to Sally and say, Sally, I'd like to talk about Bob. There's a couple times where he's causing problems in what we've got going on. I have talked to him directly about it, and I don't think I'm getting my point across straight. And I would ask you to help us as a team to get Bob in line with what we need to have as our outcomes. And if you've got the right kind of leadership, they will help escalate and train Bob to be out of that annoying situation. So let's take the second scenario. If that person is a nuisance, causes some problems, but you have a lot of interaction with them and they have, very little still impact on your job. Again, breathe, relax, ignore as much as you can. And this is really a lesson of learning that there are certain times and people that you have to just ignore because otherwise you will lose your mind. And your mind is very important. So in those cases, still again, breathe, relax. But if the person is a nuisance, causes some problems, has a big impact on your job, and you have to spend a lot of time around them, then you have to do something about it. And that's where, again, following the chain of command, trying to work with that person directly and say, here's the issues. Can we solve them? If it doesn't get solved that way, take it up the chain of command. And that's important because somebody who has a lot of impact on your outcome, who is a nuisance or causes problems, that is something that is a vital landmine in your company, in your organization. And fixing that is critical. So if someone is keeping you or your team or the company from succeeding because of their disruptive behavior, their jerk-like behavior, or just that they cause problems or impact your outcomes, that has to be addressed. There's certain times it's just time to let it roll off, and other times you have to address it. So now let's go with the third scenario. If the person is a threat. Now, threat could be a lot of different things. Maybe that is a person who threatens your job, meaning that maybe it is, your boss, and maybe your boss is a jerk, which we talked about a few weeks ago. But if they have the ability to impact your job, that's serious, whether you have little or no income or impact interaction with them. If they are a threat and they impact your job, there's an issue there. We're going to talk about that. If this person is a jerk, but their jerk-like behavior deals with inappropriate or threatening behavior, that is something else entirely. So if there is someone who is clearly a threat and threatening you and your stability in your job, then that is something that must be addressed. And unfortunately, it doesn't always get addressed. Why? Because sometimes people are afraid of, and sometimes rightly so, retaliation. And so you have to make the best decisions that you can. And I always encourage, now it's different if the behavior is inappropriate and or threatening in any nature. That is a direct to HR kind of scenario. Well, depends on the chain of command. If it's your immediate boss, go to your immediate boss. So always follow the chain of command. If it is your boss, go directly to HR. But if you have someone who is a threat and they are causing disruption for you and they are causing problems, regardless of whether you interact with them a lot or not, I always encourage people to try and have that conversation first with that person directly and try and understand and make them understand where you're coming from. Now, this can be very, very uncomfortable. And so that's why I'm saying if they're a threat where you feel intimidated, you feel threatened, there's abuse of any way, that's a different scenario. But if it's just somebody who's threatening because they're positioning themselves, they're trying to, outshine you, maybe they're trying to go for your job, then I always encourage people first to try and have that dialogue, but don't do that dialogue until you've prepared for it. Like sit down and write out what's happening, have some examples, but have some questions that are going to be able to start the dialogue with that person. So I might go to that person and say, Bob, hey, I'd really like to sit down and talk with you. Maybe later this afternoon, I see you have some time on your schedule around 2:00. And what I'd like to discuss is, I know there's some tension between us at times, and I'd like us to work together to try and identify where those stress points are and find out ways we can work together. Now, as you're hearing this, you might be cringing inside yourself going, but I don't like Bob. I don't want to work with Bob. Bob is a jerk. That's the whole point of why I asked this question. But sitting down and having that opportunity to work with the Bob of your jerkness gives you a chance to actually gain an upper hand. Why? Because number one, you're taking the mature route. Number two, you're actually addressing it head on instead of pretending it's not happening and allowing passive aggressive behavior to happen. But you're also showing your superiors that you look to those scenarios first, because it always looks good if you then have to escalate it to your supervisor to be able to say, just so you know, I want to bring something to your attention. I'd like to talk to you about the tension between Bob and I and our two departments. And here's what I've done so far. I asked Bob for a sit down yesterday at 2:00. These are the points that I wanted to discuss with him. I wanted to address the fact that we have sometimes competing agendas between our two departments, and that I wanted to find ways for us to solve them together rather than causing confusion in interaction within our organizations. But I have to be honest, Sally, Bob didn't seem very responsive to my dialogue. And I would like to have your help with this, because it's important for me that Bob and I are able to work together. Now, what that would tell me as a manager is that not only have you identified the problem, which I probably already know about, but I haven't dealt with, and but that I'm also going to know that you've tried to solve the problem the right way by having a clear head, clear dialogue, and really clear and calm points. And in those cases, I'm going to view you as the person who really truly believes in the organization. And I'm going to look at Bob and say, why isn't Bob a part of this? I know this has been going on. I've just kind of let them work it out, but now something's got to be done. And so what that says about you, regardless of the outcome with the jerk, is that you are committed to trying to find positive and proactive solutions to these kinds of interactions. I just had a very cute interaction on a point. And no, Michael Bartolucci, that is not who I'm talking about. And I love it. So it is, but when you make these decisions to actually address someone who is the jerk, then there's risk. I'm not going to lie. There's always risk. There's risk that that person won't respond. There's risk that your supervisor won't respond. There's risk that you may cause more of a disruption with it. But ignoring things is worse in the long run. And in the end, you will feel more proud of yourself for doing it. You will also start to gain more confidence, so you won't allow jerk-like behavior to impact you. So as I keep referring to breathe and yoga dog, the better that we become at not only dealing with jerks, but ignoring the jerks, the stronger that we look as individuals and as leaders. So I hope that helps. I know it's at least something that I have practiced time and time again. Not always perfectly, but in the story that I was sharing about this jerk in my past, it was about 20 years ago or so in my career. And with that individual, I tried to address it. It did not work. I tried to go to my supervisor. It did not work. Later, what I did, which is unfortunate, is I left that organization because what I saw from being a really good, positive contributor to an organization was that if the organization wasn't going to fix the problem, then I was no longer wanting to be a part of that organization. And here's the reality: if you are a leader and you know you have jerks in your midst, and you don't get rid of those jerks, you will lose good people, and that's very sad. And in that case, about 6 months or so after I left that job, that person was terminated. I don't know whatever happened to that person, but my guess is that that person somehow is still working and is probably still a jerk. But I hope that whoever is dealing with him next or now is getting a little of this idea to maybe help that person along his journey. So hope that gave you guys some things to think about. Hope you have a happy Friday. Remember, if you haven't downloaded the Shock Your Potential app, I want you to do it. Make sure. And we will have a great next topic next week to help us continue to shock our potential.